Imagine waking up not to the blaring sound of an alarm, but to the slow rise of the sun spilling through a window carved centuries ago. Imagine living in a world where time was not a tyrant ticking in your ear, but a river you moved with, instead of against. This is how ancient sages lived, and their wisdom still captivates us today. In our age of constant deadlines, calendar notifications, and micro-scheduled mornings, the idea of ignoring the clock sounds impossible. Yet for thousands of years, some of the most brilliant minds on Earth flourished without it. Why? What did they know about time that we've forgotten? And how might their perspective free us from the invisible chains of our own schedules? For ancient thinkers, time was not a commodity to be measured, but a dimension of experience to be felt. They rose with the light, ate when hungry, reflected when still, and acted when the moment felt ripe. This was not laziness, but alignment with a larger rhythm. By stepping outside the clock, they stepped inside a deeper reality. They saw time as cyclical rather than linear, as a living presence rather than a series of numbered units. The Vedic sages of India spoke of vast yugas, epics stretching beyond human comprehension. The Stoics observed the eternal return of seasons and stars. Taoist masters taught the art of wu wei, effortless action that happens at the right time, not forced by artificial urgency. To ignore the clock was not to reject order, but to embrace a greater order. Contrast that with how most of us live today. We measure our worth in minutes. We multitask to squeeze more productivity out of every hour. We panic when we waste time because we think time is running out. But ancient sages understood a subtle truth. When you obsess over time, you lose the moment. By trying to possess it, you push it away. This is why their writings, from the Upanishads to Marcus Aurelius, rarely mention specific hours, but constantly mention presence, stillness, and timelessness. They knew that the quality of an hour is more important than its quantity. One mindful breath could be more transformative than a week of frantic activity. The clock, as we know it, is a relatively new invention. Mechanical clocks appeared in medieval monasteries to regulate prayer times. Before that, people used sundials, water clocks, and the movement of stars. These tools marked a change, but did not dominate life. A shepherd in ancient Greece didn't consult a wristwatch before leading his flock. A monk in early China didn't set a timer before meditating. They relied on natural cues, the warmth of the sun, the angle of shadows, the call of birds. By synchronizing with nature, they also synchronized with themselves. Their nervous systems were not constantly jolted by alarms, and their minds were not fractured by countdowns. Ignoring the clock also shaped how sages thought. Deep contemplation requires unbroken stretches of time, free from interruption. When you're always checking the hour, your thinking stays shallow. But when you let go of the clock, your mind can sink like a diver into the ocean of ideas. This is how Aristotle could walk for hours in his peripatetic school, how Buddhist monks could sit for days in meditation, how hermits could carve philosophies into cave walls without a single deadline. Their ideas grew like trees, not like tweets. In a world obsessed with speed, that slowness feels radical. You might wonder, but didn't ancient societies have schedules too? Of course they did. Farmers had to plant at the right season, priests had to perform rituals at the right phase of the moon, and traders had to meet at agreed-upon times. Yet even these obligations were framed by nature's rhythms, not by arbitrary hours. The sense of urgency was different. It was not about squeezing more into less, but about arriving at the opportune moment. The Greeks even had two words for time: Chronos, the sequential ticking time we measure, and Kairos, the qualitative time of opportunity. Modern life has all but erased Kairos. Ancient sages lived by it. There's another reason they ignored the clock: liberation. When you measure your life in units, you unconsciously treat yourself as a unit of production. You start to see every moment as a transaction. What can I get? What can I do? How can I maximize? But sages saw time as a gift, not a wage. They withdrew from the market of minutes to reclaim their inner freedom. This is why so many of them retreated to mountains, forests, or deserts. By stepping out of society's time, they stepped into their own. Paradoxically, this gave them the capacity to influence society for centuries. Their words still echo while the schedules of kings and merchants are forgotten. Ignoring the clock also sharpened their sense of mortality. Without constant distraction, they could face impermanence directly. They watched the sun rise and set, felt the seasons shift, and knew that life moves in cycles. This made them humble, but also courageous. Instead of fearing time, they befriended it. Instead of racing against it, they walked with it. When Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You could leave life right now," he wasn't panicking about a deadline. He was awakening to the truth that every moment contains eternity if met fully. By ignoring the clock, sages were not blind to death. They were intimate with it, and thus more alive. Today, when people try digital detoxes or slow living, they're unconsciously echoing this ancient practice. They feel the relief of not being ruled by numbers. They rediscover their natural rhythms. They realize that creativity, insight, and even productivity often flourish when freed from rigid time slots. This is not nostalgia, but neuroscience. Studies show that when we're in a state of flow, our sense of time dissolves. Hours feel like minutes. This timeless state is exactly what sages cultivated deliberately. They created conditions for it by ignoring the clock. What would happen if you tried this? Not abandoning all responsibilities, but setting aside a part of your day to live without measuring it. A walk without looking at your phone. A period of work without glancing at the clock. A conversation without mentally calculating how long it's taking. You might discover, as the sages did, that time expands when you stop grasping at it. You might think more clearly, feel more deeply, and act more decisively, not because you scheduled it, but because you surrendered to it. The modern obsession with time also warps our sense of value. We equate busyness with importance, speed with success. Yet some of the greatest breakthroughs arise from idleness, contemplation, and waiting. The seed does not sprout faster because you stare at it. A child does not grow quicker because you measure her height every hour. Sages knew this, and so they cultivated patience. They were gardeners of the mind, not factory managers of minutes. They planted ideas, watered them with reflection, and let them bloom in their own season. In a world of instant gratification, this patience feels revolutionary. Patience was not weakness for the ancients, it was power. By refusing to be hurried, they developed an inner steadiness that outlasted empires. Think of Lao Tzu wandering away from the court, leaving behind the Tao Te Ching like a seed for future generations. Think of Socrates spending his last hours in prison calmly discussing the soul. Think of the Desert Fathers retreating into silence for decades. None of these figures lived in a world without challenges, but they refused to let time dictate their essence. They mastered the art of waiting, not as passivity, but as alignment with the unfolding of reality. In this, they discovered a paradox. The less they clung to time, the more timeless their influence became. Ignoring the clock also allowed sages to enter states of heightened perception. Without the constant background noise of what's next and how long, their senses sharpened. A breeze on the skin, the sound of a bird, the rhythm of their own breath became gateways to insight. They saw correspondences between nature and mind because they actually observed them, not in passing but in depth. Modern science confirms that undistracted attention enhances not only memory, but also creativity. The sages anticipated this by living it. When they wrote about oneness, eternity, or the eternal now, they were not using poetic metaphors. They were reporting a lived experience born from stepping outside measured time. Consider the spiritual practices that came from these traditions. Meditation, prayer, philosophical dialogue, and walking contemplation, all are exercises in timelessness. When you meditate, you let go of the past and future to return to the present. When you pray deeply, the minutes vanish. When you engage in a genuine conversation, you lose track of hours. The sages designed their lives around these practices, not as hobbies, but as foundations. Without clocks, they could sink fully into them, emerging with insights that still guide humanity today. It is no accident that their writings speak to people across centuries. They were written from a place already outside time. The question for us is not whether to throw away our watches, but how to recover this sense of timelessness within a timed world. We cannot abandon our responsibilities, yet we can choose how we relate to time. The first step is noticing how often we consult the clock or phone. Each glance fractures attention and subtly reinforces the belief that we are running out. The second step is to experiment with time-free zones, moments when you deliberately avoid checking the time. Begin with something simple: a meal without a clock nearby, a walk without counting steps, reading without tracking minutes. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, even frightening. That discomfort reveals how deeply we've internalized the clock's rule. But stay with it, and a spaciousness emerges. From that spaciousness, a new kind of productivity appears. Not the frantic productivity of cramming, but the organic productivity of flow. Artists, scientists, and athletes call it being in the zone. Psychologists call it optimal experience. Sages simply lived it. They knew that the best action arises from the right moment, not from constant pressure. This is why the Taoists emphasize effortless action and why Stoics advise focusing only on what is within your control. You cannot control the passing of hours, but you can control the quality of your presence. Ironically, this shift often leads to greater effectiveness. When you stop rushing, you make fewer mistakes. When you stop fragmenting your attention, your ideas deepen. The sages were not anti-achievement, they were pro-essence. There is also a moral dimension to ignoring the clock. When you stop measuring every moment for utility, you begin to value life intrinsically. People cease to be interruptions, they become encounters. Nature stops being a backdrop, it becomes a teacher. Even your own thoughts become less like tasks to manage and more like clouds to observe. This ethical shift echoes through ancient texts. Be still and know, says the Psalm. The way never hurries, says the Tao Te Ching. What is important is rarely urgent, implies Marcus Aurelius. They were pointing to a way of being where quality outweighs quantity, depth surpasses speed, and presence dissolves anxiety. Another hidden benefit is resilience. A person ruled by the clock is always a little brittle because any delay feels like a threat. A person attuned to natural time can bend without breaking. They recover faster from setbacks because they are not locked into rigid schedules or expectations. The seasons teach them that winter yields to spring, that darkness contains seeds of light. This cyclical view nurtures patience, hope, and perspective, qualities sorely needed in our crisis-driven culture. By ignoring the clock, sages cultivated an inner climate that storms could not uproot. Think also of how they relate to aging and death. Modern culture treats aging as a countdown and death as a deadline. Sages treated both as transitions in a vast continuum. They observed that just as day turns to night and winter to spring, so life turns to death and perhaps to another form of life. This did not make them indifferent, but wise. They invested their energy not in clinging, but in understanding, not in rushing, but in ripening. To live without the tyranny of time is to live without the fear of running out. It is to realize, as many mystics did, that eternity is not endless clock time, but the depth of being now. You can begin to taste this in small ways. Try pausing before a decision instead of reacting instantly. Try savoring a conversation without glancing at your phone. Try working until a natural stopping point rather than an arbitrary timer. Notice how your body feels when you do this. Often calmer, more open, more alive. These are not romantic gestures, but practical steps to reclaim your mind from the clock's grip. Over weeks and months, they can rewire your relationship to time. You become less hurried yet more effective, less scattered yet more creative, less fearful yet more aware. Ultimately, ignoring the clock is about remembering who you are. You are not a machine built to output units of work per hour. You are a conscious being in a living cosmos, part of rhythms older than any watch. When you step into those rhythms, you step into a lineage of wisdom stretching from the earliest shamans to today's contemplatives. You join a tradition of people who refuse to let time define their worth and, in doing so, discovered a deeper freedom. This is not escapism. It is the foundation for a life of meaning. So the next time you feel crushed by deadlines or haunted by the ticking of a clock, recall the sages. Picture the rising sun, the flowing river, the silent forest. Remember that time is not your enemy, but your teacher. Ask yourself not how much time do I have, but how alive am I in this moment? In shifting that question, you may find that the weight of time dissolves and a new spaciousness opens within you. From that spaciousness, wisdom arises naturally, like a spring from the earth. What about you? How do you relate to time? Have you ever tried living without constantly checking the clock, even for a short while? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if this message resonated with you, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into philosophy and timeless living. Together, let's rediscover the freedom that the ancients knew so well.